She asked for old bread and received cruel laughter in return. The manager humiliated her, calling her trash in front of everyone. But when the millionaire owner walked in, fate turned upside down. And what he did in that instant made the entire hall cry. What do you think will happen in this story? Comment and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear. The sun was shyly rising in Miami, Florida, illuminating the colorful facades of the harbor. Lights District, as Louise Bennett walked along Citrus Grove Lane. Her empty stomach protested, but not as much as the weight of the humiliation she carried on her shoulders. 2 days without a decent meal had left her body fragile, but her spirit still resisted. With hesitant steps, she adjusted her simple, faded dress that once had a vibrant color like her life. The Sterling Bakery, with its imposing facade of Portuguese tiles, stood out among the historic mansions as a symbol of prosperity. From it emanated an irresistible aroma of freshly baked bread, a scent that, for many, meant comfort, but for Louise, it was a painful reminder of everything she had lost. One day, this will be my daily life again, she murmured to herself, gathering courage to push open the heavy, carved wooden door. The interior was even more impressive. Marble counters, crystal-clear glass display cases exhibiting refined pastries and artisan breads, uniformed employees with impeccable presentation. Miami's elite occupied the tables, savoring coffee in fine porcelain cups, amidst carefree conversations about life. Louise took a deep breath. The contrast between her crumbling world and that gleaming environment made her stomach churn, not from hunger, but from shame. Even so, she advanced to the counter where Marcus Thorne, a manager known for his inflexible demeanor, was arranging a display of croissants. "Good morning," she whispered, almost inaudibly. Marcus looked up, and his expression immediately hardened. He examined Louise from head to toe, from her poorly combed curly hair to her worn shoes. "Can I help you?" he asked with calculated coldness. "Please, I'd like to know if you have any day-old bread or anything that's about to be discarded." "I can pay when I find a job. I promise that—" "Day-old bread," Marcus interrupted, purposely raising his voice so that the surrounding customers could hear. "Sterling Bakery does not sell second-rate products, madam. Our customers pay for excellence." Silence fell over the hall. All conversations ceased, and dozens of eyes turned to Louise. Some curious, others disdainful, few compassionate. "I understand," she tried to explain, maintaining her dignity despite the blush that colored her face. "I didn't mean to offend. It's just that it's been 2 days since—" "Perhaps you'd prefer the crumbs from the floor?" Marcus pointed to some crumbs near the counter, a cruel smile on his lips. "That I can offer for free." Discreet laughter echoed through the room. Louise felt her legs weaken. Her pride screamed for her to turn and leave, but hunger was stronger. Slowly she bent down, reaching out to gather the crumbs, when a deep, authoritative voice froze the scene. "What a shameful spectacle is this, Marcus?" The laughter ceased instantly. A tall man of imposing stature approached the counter. He wore a well-tailored suit, but without ostentation, his dark, penetrating eyes fixed on the manager with severity. "Mr. Paul Sterling, we weren't expecting you today," Marcus stammered, suddenly pale. Paul Sterling, owner of the largest gourmet bakery chain on the southern coast, looked at Louise, still bent in a humiliating position, and his expression transformed. He gently extended his hand, inviting her to rise. "Please, madam, stand up," he said in a calm but firm voice. "No one picks up crumbs in my establishment." The atmosphere remained in a sepulchral silence as Louise, confused and ashamed, accepted the extended hand. As she stood up, her eyes met Paul Sterling's, a gaze that carried no pity but a strange recognition. "Marcus," Paul Sterling turned to the manager without letting go of Louise's hand, "gather your things and leave. Your presence is no longer required in this company." "But, sir," the manager protested, "I'm only maintaining the standard of the house. This woman was disturbing our customers and—" "The standard of my house," Paul Sterling interrupted, "is respect. If you haven't learned that in 5 years of working here, there's nothing more to teach. You're fired." Without another word, Paul Sterling led Louise to a secluded table, leaving Marcus paralyzed by the counter. With a gesture, he called Miss Zoe, the bakery's oldest cook, known for her talent and generous heart. "Zoe, please, prepare a complete breakfast for the lady—" "Louise," she completed, still stunned. "Louise Bennett." "Louise Bennett," Paul Sterling repeated, as if the name stirred something in his memory. "You don't need to go through this. Eat in peace, and we'll talk later." While Miss Zoe hurried to fulfill the order, Louise remained motionless, watching the owner converse discreetly with other employees. In minutes, a young customer discreetly approached, displaying her phone screen. "Look, it's already blowing up on social media," she whispered, showing Louise a video of the exact moment Paul Sterling intervened in the situation. "Everyone's sharing it." Louise felt her blood run. Cold. The last thing she wanted was public exposure of her misery. Before she could respond, the young woman moved away, and Ms. Zoe arrived with a laden tray. Various breads, fresh fruits, cheeses, ham, cake, juice, and coffee. "Eat slowly, my dear," smiled the gray-haired woman. "The boss is a rare man." Louise could barely thank her. Hunger spoke louder, and she ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the last meal of her life. From afar, Paul Sterling watched with an enigmatic expression, as if contemplating a puzzle whose pieces were beginning to fit together. After the meal, when the bakery's activity subsided, he returned to Louise's table. "Feeling better?" "Much," she replied sincerely. "I don't know how to thank you, and I promise I'll pay for all of this as soon as—" "I'm not concerned with payment," he interrupted gently. "I'm concerned with you. No one reaches this point without a difficult story behind it." There was something in his gaze that inspired confidence. It wasn't pity nor morbid curiosity. It seemed genuine interest. "It's a long story," Louise sighed. "I have time," he replied, settling in front of her. "But first I want to make a proposal. I need someone with sensitivity and knowledge of baking to help develop new products. It would be a paid job, with all benefits." Louise swallowed hard, suspicious of the sudden offer. "Why me? You don't even know me?" Paul Sterling smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, as if guarding a secret. "Intuition, perhaps. Or perhaps because your eyes, even in adversity, reveal knowledge about what you observe. I saw how you analyzed each bread in the display with a technical gaze, not just a hungry one. Am I wrong?" Louise hesitated. How could he know? It had been so long since she had practiced her profession that she doubted she still carried any visible trace of her training. "I studied gastronomy," she finally admitted. "Specialization in artisan baking in France." Paul Sterling's face lit up with genuine surprise and satisfaction, as if he had just confirmed something important. "So, do you accept my proposal?" The fear of exposure on social media still bothered her, but the opportunity seemed like the lifeline she had been waiting for. After so much humiliation, the chance to regain not only her livelihood, but her professional dignity. "I accept," she replied, extending her hand. As they shook hands, a waiter discreetly approached. "Mr. Sterling, there's a gentleman at the entrance who wants to speak with you. Says he's from South Coast News Channel. Something about an interview regarding the incident." Paul Sterling's smile disappeared, replaced by a worried expression. Louise paled. "Don't worry," he reassured. "I'll handle this. No one will expose you." As Paul Sterling walked away to deal with the press, Louise remained seated, contemplating the unexpected turn of events that morning. From beggar to employee in a matter of minutes, from humiliated to protected by the owner of the establishment. But an uncomfortable feeling persisted. Why so much interest in her? Why so much kindness from a stranger? And most importantly, why did she feel she had seen that face before at some distant point in her memory? Through the bakery window, she watched Marcus Thorne leave with a box of belongings, his face contorted in hatred. Their gazes crossed for an instant, and in that brief moment Louise was certain that story was far from over. At the bakery door, Paul Sterling politely dismissed the reporter, but the video was already circulating on the phones of those present. The act of kindness, the manager's dismissal, the mystery of that disheveled woman who apparently understood French baking. All the ingredients of a story that, like good bread, was only just beginning to rise. What Louise didn't know was that that day would mark not only the end of her misfortune, but the beginning of a journey of rediscovery, reunions, and revelations that would forever change the course of several lives intertwined by fate, or perhaps by choices made long ago. The next morning Louise awoke in the small hotel room Paul Sterling had provided until she got settled. The reality of the previous day seemed like a distant dream. She sat on the bed, touching the clean sheets, as if to confirm they were real. In the room's mirror she saw the reflection of someone she barely recognized, not by her worn appearance, but by the renewed sparkle in her eyes. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Rachel Foster, Mr. Sterling's assistant. I've come to pick you up for your first day." During the drive to the Sterling chain's administrative headquarters, located in a restored mansion in the historic city center, Louise watched the city through the car window. Miami appeared imposing, with its colonial mansions, Baroque churches, and the deep blue sea in the background. The same city that days before had seemed hostile now offered a new beginning. "Mr. Sterling rarely visits branches personally," Rachel commented, breaking the silence. "It was quite a coincidence that he was there yesterday." "Coincidence," Louise murmured, more to herself than to Rachel. In her experience, coincidences rarely existed. Upon arriving at headquarters, Louise was led through elegant corridors to a spacious room with large windows. Paul Sterling stood, contemplating the Harbor Lights district. Without turning, as if sensing her presence, he spoke. "Legend says the best bread is born from hands that have known both the fine flour and the coarse flour of life." He turned to face her. In the natural light, Louise could better observe his face. There was dignity in his features, but also marks that spoke of past struggles, something that contrasted with his current position of prestige. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Sterling," she said, maintaining formality. "Paul Sterling, please," he smiled, indicating a chair. "I think we can skip some formalities, considering the circumstances." As he explained the details of the job, developing a new line of artisan braids inspired by traditional American recipes, Paul Sterling carefully observed Louise's every reaction, the way she nodded, how her eyes sparkled when discussing natural fermentation techniques, the technical vocabulary that escaped her naturally. "You have plenty of knowledge," he commented. "What intrigues me is how someone with your background ended up in that state." Louise stiffened. It was the question she feared but knew was inevitable. "Fate has winding paths," she replied vaguely. Paul Sterling nodded, respecting her reticence. "When you're ready to share your story, I'll be here to listen. For now, I'd like you to meet the rest of the team and the experimental kitchen." The morning passed in introductions and familiarization with the space. Most employees greeted Louise with professional cordiality, although some suspicious glances did not go unnoticed. At lunch, she felt out of place in the executive cafeteria until Ms. Zoe, the cook who had served her the day before, sat at her table. "Don't mind the comments," the woman said with maternal affection. "Big shots always distrust sudden changes." "What comments?" Ms. Zoe hesitated, but decided, to be honest. "The video spread. Many people are saying it was all staged, a marketing strategy. Others speculate that you must be a distant relative of Mr. Sterling, or worse." "Worse?" Louise felt her stomach sink. that there are personal interests involved, Zoe completed, uncomfortable. Malicious people always exist, but I've known the boss for 20 years. He's reserved, sometimes enigmatic, but fair. If he saw something in you, it's because it exists. After lunch, while working in the experimental kitchen, testing natural fermentation bread recipes, Louise felt her phone, also provided by Paul Sterling, vibrate. It was a message from Rachel. Mr. Sterling requests your presence in the main meeting room. Urgent. Upon entering the room, she found Paul Sterling with a grave expression, in front of a screen displaying a digital newspaper page. The headline was explicit. Bakery magnate fires manager to hire homeless woman. Charity or publicity stunt? I'm sorry about this, he said, turning off the screen. The press always distorts everything. I'm used to judgments, Louise replied, more bothered by the term homeless woman than by the insinuations. The problem is that this affects your privacy and your work here, Paul Sterling continued. Suppliers are already calling, investors asking questions. We need a strategy. What kind of strategy? Louise asked, suddenly defensive. Transparency. We can issue a statement explaining that you are a qualified professional going through a difficult time without going into personal details. He paused. Or we can simply ignore it and let time resolve it. Louise pondered the options when the door to the room opened abruptly. A man of approximately 40 with an athletic build and impeccable suit entered unceremoniously. Paul, we need to talk about this publicity fiasco. The words died in his mouth when his gaze met Louise's. There was a moment of mutual recognition, followed by a palpable tension that filled the room. Louise? The surprise in his voice was genuine. Gregory, she replied dryly, feeling her legs weaken. Paul Sterling observed the interaction with interest. Do you two know each other? We do, Louise replied, before Gregory could speak. Gregory Pierce was my partner, and the one responsible for me ending up in that situation. The silence that followed was thick as unfermented bread dough. Gregory, recovering from the initial surprise, adjusted his tie in a nervous gesture. Paul, I didn't know it. Was her the person in question, he said, avoiding looking directly at Louise. We have a complicated history. Complicated? Louise laughed without humor. Is that what you call siphoning off all the money from our bakery and disappearing, leaving me to blame with the suppliers? Paul Sterling's expression hardened. Gregory has been our financial consultant for 2 years, he explained to Louise before turning to the man. And it seems we have a lot to talk about. Everything has an explanation, Gregory tried to temporize, now visibly uncomfortable. It was a difficult period. Things happened that— Spare us, Paul Sterling cut him off. Louise, please, would you excuse us? We need to have a private conversation. Louise nodded, leaving quickly. She leaned against the corridor wall, breathing with difficulty. Of all possibilities, finding Gregory there, in the exact place that offered her redemption, seemed like a cruel joke of fate. Or was it more than a coincidence? Did Paul Sterling have any prior connection to Gregory? Had they orchestrated all of this? Distrust, her old companion in recent months, returned with full force. Back in the experimental kitchen, Louise channeled her frustration into the dough she kneaded vigorously. Each strong movement represented years of contained resentment. It was in this state that Rachel found her half an hour later. Louise, Mr. Sterling and Mr. Pierce would like you to return to the meeting room. With apprehension, Louise followed Rachel back. Upon entering, she immediately noticed the change in the atmosphere. Gregory stood, his face pale, while Paul Sterling remained seated with a grave expression. Please sit down, Paul Sterling indicated. Louise sat as far as possible from Gregory, who seemed to avoid her gaze at all costs. Gregory told me a version of your past, Paul Sterling began. I'd like to hear yours, Louise. Hesitantly, she gathered courage. It was time to face the past she had tried so hard to forget. We met in culinary school. After I graduated and returned from my internship in France, we reconnected and fell in love. Gregory had a knack for business that I didn't. Together we opened Flower and Art, a small artisan bakery on Citrus Grove Lane. For 2 years, we built a solid reputation. Her voice faltered momentarily. Paul Sterling offered her a glass of water, which she accepted gratefully. In the 3rd year, we began to expand. We took out loans, hired more staff, bought equipment. I handled production, Gregory handled finances. Until one day, I arrived to find furious suppliers at the door, unpaid employees, and emptied bank accounts. Gregory had disappeared with all the money. Gregory stirred, uncomfortable, but remained silent. Since I was a partner, I took on all the debts. I sold what I had, lost my apartment, my professional credibility. No one would hire me in the field anymore. Word got around that I had defrauded my own business. For the past 6 months, I lived on odd jobs until I couldn't even do that anymore. She took a deep breath. The day before yesterday, I gave my last money to an elderly woman I found crying in the street because she couldn't afford medicine. Yesterday, I was picking up crumbs from a bakery floor. The silence that followed was heavy with contained emotion. Paul Sterling seemed to process each word carefully. Gregory has a different version, he finally said. He claims he was threatened by loan sharks he turned to when the bank denied additional loans. He says he fled to protect you, believing that the creditors wouldn't bother you if he took all the blame and disappeared. Louise stared at Gregory with disbelief. And I'm supposed to believe that after 2 years of silence? I'm not asking you to believe it, Gregory finally spoke. I know what I did is unforgivable, but I swear I didn't divert money for luxury or pleasures. It was all a desperate gamble to save the business, and when it went wrong... Regardless of the motivations, Paul Sterling interrupted, the consequences were real. Gregory, considering the circumstances, I think it's best we temporarily end our partnership. I cannot keep someone with this history as a financial consultant. Gregory's face paled even further. I understand, he murmured. As for you, Louise, Paul Sterling continued, I want to reaffirm that your position here is guaranteed, regardless of this past. In fact, he hesitated briefly. Perhaps it's the ideal time to discuss a larger proposal I have in mind. Gregory stood up abruptly. If you'll excuse me, he said in a controlled voice, heading for the door. When the door closed, Louise felt the weight of the encounter collapse on her shoulders. Years of cultivating anger against Gregory, imagining confrontations, and when it finally happened, she felt only empty. Are you all right? Paul Sterling asked with genuine concern. Honestly, I don't know, she replied with honesty. For so long, I've dreamed of making Gregory pay for what he did, and now, I don't know if that changes anything. Paul Sterling watched her for a few moments, as if pondering something important. Revenge rarely brings the relief it promises, he commented. Believe me, I speak from experience. There was something in the way he said it, a personal shadow that crossed his gaze, that made Louise realize Paul Sterling also carried his own untold stories, his own pains. What is this proposal you mentioned? She asked, trying to shift the focus of the conversation. Something ambitious, he replied, composing himself. But first, let's resolve this press issue, and for that, I need you to trust me. At that moment, Louise realized she was at a crossroads. To trust again, after everything she had been through, seemed an impossible risk. But looking at that man who, for no apparent reason, had extended a hand when everyone else turned their backs, she felt something inexplicable. Why are you doing all this for me? She finally asked, the doubt that had consumed her since the beginning. Paul Sterling stood up, approached the window again, contemplating the Miami skyline. For a moment it seemed he wouldn't answer. Let's say I'm paying an old debt, he finally said without turning. One you don't even know I owe. Before Louise could ask for explanations, the phone rang. Paul Sterling answered, his expression changing rapidly. "Put it on the screen," he ordered. On the large screen in the room, a live news report appeared. Marcus Thorne, the former dismissed manager, was giving an interview in front of a competitor bakery. His speech was venomous. He accused Paul Sterling of using false charity as a marketing strategy, insinuated an improper relationship with Louise, and announced that he was being hired by the competition to open a true quality bakery. Beside him, to Louise's shock, stood Gregory, smiling for the cameras. "Turn that off," Paul Sterling ordered, his calm voice contrasting with the evident tension in his posture. Louise remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the image of Gregory next to Marcus. Betrayal, once again, wore the face of someone she had once loved. Ironically, this time it hurt less, which meant she might finally be healing old wounds. "This changes everything," Paul Sterling sighed, turning off the screen himself. Marcus was always ambitious, but now it's personal, and Gregory, well, it seems his version of events has just lost all credibility. Or maybe it was never a coincidence, Louise reflected. Maybe Gregory knew who I was from the start. Maybe you knew too. Paul Sterling looked at her seriously. "If you're suggesting I set up some kind of encounter, I assure you I didn't. But," he hesitated briefly, "I can't say I'm completely surprised by the turn of events." Rachel rushed into the room. "Sir, the phones won't stop ringing. 3 newspapers, 2 TV stations, and countless influencers want statements." "Prepare an official statement. Just say that Sterling Group does not comment on speculation and that we maintain our commitment to excellence and human values." He turned to Louise. "As for us, I think it's time for that proposal I mentioned." Half an hour later, they were in a smaller, more private room. A projector displayed images of a large plot of land on the outskirts of Miami. "This is the old Biscayne mill, closed for 5 years," Paul Sterling explained. "I recently bought the property with an idea in mind to transform it into a bakery school for vocational training of people in vulnerable situations." Louise observed the images with growing interest. The place, despite being abandoned, maintained its characteristic industrial architecture with ample possibilities. "The idea is to offer artisan baking training and, at the same time, produce breads that will be sold at an affordable price to the local community," he continued. "Students receive scholarships during training, and, at the end, the best can be hired by the chain or supported to open their own businesses." "It's an ambitious project," Louise commented, genuinely impressed. "And it needs a technical director," Paul Sterling completed, "someone with knowledge of artisan baking, practical experience, and most importantly, who understands the value of a second chance." The proposal hung in the air between them. Louise felt the weight of responsibility, but also the excitement of the possibility. Why me? There are more experienced professionals with intact reputations without the drama that currently accompanies me. Paul Sterling smiled. Precisely for that reason. Who better to lead a project about new beginnings than someone who is starting over? Before she could answer, Rachel entered again, looking alarmed. "Mr. Sterling, a crowd is forming in front of the Sterling Bakery in the Harbor Lights district. Marcus is leading a protest, saying the company exploited Louise's image for marketing and that they will expose the truth." Paul Sterling stood up immediately. "Let's go there. We'll deal with this now." "No," Louise protested. "That's exactly what they want. Confrontation, drama, more material for the media." "You're right," Paul Sterling agreed after a moment of reflection. "Rachel, send Jason, our legal advisor, to ensure nothing illegal happens. If there's defamation or obstruction of entry, he should call the authorities. Meanwhile," he turned to Louise, "I think it's best you stay here until everything calms down." After Rachel left, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Louise realized that since all this had started, she hadn't had a moment to truly process what was happening. Suddenly she felt suffocated by everything, the rapidity of events, the cameras, the accusations, the exposure. "I need air," she said abruptly, heading for the door. "Louise, wait." Paul Sterling tried to stop her, but she was already in the corridor. Without a defined direction, Louise found a small balcony at the back of the building with a view of the distant sea. The salty breeze refreshed her face as she breathed deeply. How had her life changed so drastically in just 2 days? "I thought I might find you here," Ms. Zoe's voice emerged behind her. The cook approached, offering a cup of tea. "When your head boils like dough in the oven, lemon balm tea calms it," Louise accepted, grateful for the comforting presence of the elderly woman. "How did you know where to find me?" "I've worked with Mr. Sterling for a long time. This balcony is where he comes when he needs to." "Think," Zoe replied, leaning on the railing next to Louise. "You two are alike in many ways." "I barely know him," Louise countered. "Sometimes we know strangers who look us in the eye better than family members who see us every day," the cook philosophized. "Paul Sterling is a man of contradictions, tough in business, but capable of incredible gestures of generosity. Reserved about his past, but obsessed with stories of overcoming challenges." "What do you know about his past?" Louise asked, curiosity overcoming discretion. Ms. Zoe smiled. "Only fragments. I know he came from very humble origins, from rural Georgia, that he went hungry in his youth, that he built everything from scratch with hard work and determination. The details, only he can tell." Louise nodded, absorbing the information as she watched the horizon. "He mentioned an old debt to me, but didn't explain. How can I have any connection with him if we've never met before?" "Fate has winding paths," Zoe replied, inadvertently repeating the same words Louise had used earlier. Perhaps it's time to ask directly. When she returned to the room, she found Paul Sterling on the phone, a worried expression on his face. Seeing her, he quickly ended the call. "I was about to look for you," he said. "The situation has become complicated." The protest. "Not just that. Gregory gave an interview claiming that you and I had a relationship in the past, and that's why I rescued you at that bakery. He's insinuating that the video was entirely staged to relaunch your public image after the scandal of your business's bankruptcy." Louise felt her blood run cold. "But that's completely absurd. We never met before." Paul Sterling looked away, a shadow of hesitation crossing his face. That brief moment was enough for a suspicion to form in Louise's mind. "Or did we?" she asked, suddenly alert. The businessman took a deep breath, as if making a difficult decision. "Not in the way Gregory is insinuating," he affirmed, "but yes, our paths crossed once, many years ago. I doubt you remember." "When? Where?" Louise pressed, feeling she was finally getting close to an enigma that had intrigued her from the start. "Charleston Bus Terminal, 1998, he replied, carefully observing her reaction. "I was in my early 20s, had just lost everything in a failed business. I had no money to go home, hadn't eaten for 2 days. A vague memory began to form in Louise's mind. The bus terminal, a trip back from an aunt's house. She was only 16 at the time. "You were sitting with your mother," Paul Sterling continued, "eating a simple snack. You saw me sitting alone and noticed my state. You approached and offered me half of your bread. Without pity, without condescension, just pure humanity." The memory was now complete. The thin young man with a lost look, so different from the confident man in front of her. The impulsive gesture her mother initially tried to prevent, worried about a stranger approaching. "You said something to me," Paul Sterling recalled, his voice now laden with emotion. "Everyone needs bread to continue their journey. Today, it's you. Tomorrow, it could be me." Louise felt unexpected tears well up. "It's not possible that you remember that after so many years. It was just a moment. For you, perhaps. For me, it was the turning point." He approached, his eyes fixed on hers. "That gesture gave me the strength not to give up. The following week, I got a job in a bakery. 6 months later, I had my own bakery. The rest is history. And when you saw me in that bakery yesterday, I recognized you immediately. Years had passed, of course, but your eyes had the same light. I thought it was coincidence, fate, or whatever. A chance to repay something I've carried with me for decades." Louise absorbed everything in silence, stunned by the revelation. Such a small gesture, so distant in her memory, had meant so much to another person. Life truly had unexpected ways of connecting people. "Is that why you're so sure about the bakery school project?" she finally asked. "Because of that moment?" "Partially," he admitted, "but also because I genuinely believe in the concept, and because, after learning your professional history, I know you're the right person to lead this." Before they could continue their conversation, Rachel entered again, now visibly distressed. "Sir, the situation is out of control. Marcus and his supporters have blocked the bakery entrance, and Gregory Pierce is giving a live interview making serious accusations." Paul Sterling stood up, determined. "We can no longer be on the defensive. It's time to face this head on." "How?" Louise asked. "A press conference. Now. We'll tell our version, the true story." 40 minutes later, the large convention room at headquarters was filled with journalists, cameras, and recorders. The buzzing ceased when Paul Sterling and Louise entered together. She felt her heart racing, but there was a new determination in her eyes. "I thank everyone for their presence," Paul Sterling began. "Normally, I wouldn't call a press conference to address personal matters, but given the misinformation circulating, I feel obliged to clarify some points." Louise watched the crowd when she noticed, in the background, Marcus and Gregory entering discreetly. She lightly touched Paul Sterling's arm, indicating with her gaze. He nodded, understanding, and continued, "2 days ago I had the opportunity to reconnect with someone who, unknowingly, changed my life many years ago with a simple act of kindness. Louise Bennett is not a stranger I helped for marketing, as they are insinuating. She is a qualified professional who went through difficulties due to circumstances that are not mine to detail." He paused, looking directly at Gregory, who seemed uncomfortable. "What I can guarantee is that there is no romantic relationship between us, neither in the past nor now. There is, however, a professional project that we will be pleased to announce soon. As for the accusations about the video being staged," he smiled slightly, "I believe the spontaneity of the scene speaks for itself." The journalists began to fire questions simultaneously. Paul Sterling indicated a reporter from a respected newspaper. "Mr. Sterling, how do you respond to former manager Marcus Thorne's accusations that your company practices selective charity solely for publicity purposes?" The Sterling Group has maintained several social programs for years, without fanfare or publicity. The incident with Ms. Bennett was not planned, but it reflects values we have always upheld. Another journalist stood up. "Ms. Bennett, could you explain how a professional trained in France ended up in that situation?" Louise felt all eyes on her. Paul Sterling lightly squeezed her hand under the table in a gesture of support. "Life has its ups and downs for everyone," she began, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "I invested everything I had in a business that failed when my then partner and companion disappeared with the company's resources. I took on debts that were not mine out of a sense of responsibility. I sought employment, but rumors damaged my professional reputation. The rest is a consequence of a system that rarely offers second chances." Her gaze met Gregory's at the back of the room. He seemed smaller, diminished under the weight of the exposed truth. A more aggressive reporter stood up. "To Mr. Sterling, there are rumors that the dismissed former manager and Ms. Bennett's former partner are joining forces to open a competing bakery with foreign investors. Does this concern you?" Paul Sterling smiled with genuine tranquility. Healthy competition only raises the market standard. If this new bakery offers quality products and treats its employees and customers with respect, it will have my sincere best wishes for success. The elegant response clearly surprised Marcus, whose face visibly flushed from the back of the room. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with questions being answered with calculated honesty. At the end, Paul Sterling made an announcement that caught everyone by surprise, including Louise. "I take this opportunity to officially announce the New Start Project, a bakery school aimed at vocational training for people in vulnerable situations. The project will be led by Chef Louise Bennett, whose international experience and personal story uniquely qualify her for this mission." Turning to Louise, he asked, "Do you officially accept the challenge?" Without hesitation, she nodded. "I accept." The room exploded in flashes. In the background, Marcus and Gregory discreetly retreated, defeated by the transparency they hadn't expected. As the journalists dispersed, Paul Sterling approached Louise. "I hope you don't mind the public announcement. I thought it was the best way to turn the tables." "It was brilliant," she agreed, "but I fear this isn't the end. I know Gregory, and he doesn't give up easily." "Nor Marcus," Paul Sterling added, "but we are prepared. Starting tomorrow, we'll begin working on the project with everything we've got." As they left the building together, they were greeted by Ms. Zoe, who waited with a worried expression. "I watched everything on television," the woman said. "You both were wonderful, but—" She hesitated. "What is it, Zoe?" Paul Sterling asked. "Those two men, the former manager and the other one, I heard them talking as they left. They were talking about a foreign investor named Rodriguez who would arrive tomorrow, and that he would resolve everything." Louise and Paul Sterling exchanged worried glances. The battle, apparently, was only just beginning. That night, alone in her hotel room, Louise couldn't sleep. Her head was buzzing with the day's events, the surprising revelation about her past encounter with Paul Sterling, the confrontation with Gregory, the announcement of the project. She got up and approached the window. Miami at night was a spectacle of lights dancing over the dark sea, so different from her view 2 days before, when the same city seemed hostile and impenetrable. Her phone vibrated with a text message. It was from Paul Sterling. "Can't sleep either. I stopped by the reception and left something for you. I hope it helps." Intrigued, she called the reception, who confirmed there was a package in her name. Minutes later, an employee delivered a simple box, without elaborate packaging. Inside, a small artisan bread, still warm, with a handwritten note. "For the journey that is just beginning. Today, it's with me. Tomorrow, it could be with someone else. P.S." Louise felt her eyes well up. The cycle was unexpectedly completing itself. She bit into the bread, savoring not only its taste, but the symbolism it carried. Her phone vibrated again. This time, a social media notification. Hesitantly, she opened the app. Her heart raced when she saw she was tagged in a post from an unknown profile. It was a photo of her during the press conference with the caption, "The truth about Louise Bennett that Paul Sterling hides. Stay tuned." The sender was a newly created profile with no clear identification, but Louise immediately recognized the style. It was exactly how Gregory used to threaten competitors in the past. The battle, indeed, was only just beginning. The old Biscayne Mill factory was a curious blend of abandonment and potential. Huge windows let in natural light that illuminated the dancing dust in the air. Old machinery, peeling walls, and worn floors told the story of a place that had once pulsed with life and production, now silenced by time. Louise walked through the spacious area, accompanied by the architect hired by Paul Sterling. Her gaze, however, did not see just abandonment. She envisioned possibilities, transformation, rebirth. "This main area can become the production space," the architect explained, consulting the blueprint. "We'll keep some original elements as a testament to the place's history. Here," he pointed to a side area, "will be the cafe school, where students can practice customer service." Louise nodded, imagining the place renovated, filled with ovens, workbenches, the aroma of fresh bread replacing the smell of mold and neglect, and the spaces for theoretical classes. On the mezzanine, he replied, pointing upwards. Classrooms overlooking the production area. Total integration between theory and practice. With each detail explained, the project became more real in her mind. After a turbulent week since the press conference, something concrete was finally beginning to take shape. How long to complete the renovation? She asked, observing some workers who were already starting the preliminary cleaning. 3 months if all goes well. Paul Sterling authorized teams working in shifts to speed up the process. Louise smiled. Paul Sterling's urgency to make the project happen was palpable, almost as if he were compensating for decades of waiting. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Rachel. Urgent, come to the office now. With a bad feeling, Louise bid farewell to the architect and headed to the car where the driver awaited her. During the journey, she checked the online news. Nothing extraordinary to justify the urgency. Since the press conference, the media had softened its sensationalist tone, although the social media threat still worried her. Upon arriving at headquarters, she found a tense atmosphere. Employees whispered in the corridors, silencing as she passed. In the meeting room, she found Paul Sterling standing, hands resting on the table, studying scattered documents with a grave expression. Rachel and Jason, the legal advisor, conversed in low voices in the corner of the room. What happened? Louise asked, closing the door behind her. Paul Sterling looked up. We have 2 problems. First, someone is aggressively buying company shares on the market. Small lots to avoid attracting attention, but they have already accumulated almost 5%. And the second problem? He slid a folder towards her. Inside, a dossier with detailed information about the bankruptcy of Flower and Art, the venture Louise had shared with Gregory. There were bank statements, contracts, even personal emails between them. How did they get this? She asked, incredulously leafing through the material. It was delivered anonymously this morning, along with a proposal. Either we buy this material for a considerable sum, or it will be published on a business gossip blog. Louise sat down, her legs suddenly weak. Blackmail. Exactly, Jason confirmed, with a distorted narrative suggesting that you knew about Gregory's diversions, perhaps even participated. That's absurd. I can prove that. We know that, Paul Sterling interrupted gently. But the question isn't what's true, but public perception. An accusation like that, even if refuted later, would harm the image of the New START project before it even begins. Louise felt anger rising. It's Gregory, I'm sure. It's exactly his modus operandi. Probably, Paul Sterling agreed. But without proof, we can't officially accuse him. And what will we do? Paul Sterling smiled for the first time since she entered. We're not paying the blackmail, if that's what you're asking. I've never given in to that kind of pressure. What about the shares being bought? Do you think it's related? Almost certainly. My suspicion is that this Arthur Rodriguez, the investor mentioned by Marcus and Gregory, is behind it. They're trying to gain power within the company to sabotage our project. Rachel approached, handing a folder to Paul Sterling. The information you asked for about Arthur Rodriguez, sir. Paul Sterling opened the folder and began to read aloud. Arthur Rodriguez, 58. Argentine businessman with interests in agribusiness and real estate, recently diversifying into luxury food, known for aggressive business tactics, including hostile takeover of companies in difficulty. He paused, looking at a photo of the man, neatly trimmed gray. Hair, impeccable suit, a calculated smile designed to appear charming, but that didn't reach his cold eyes. No criminal record, but several accusations of unethical practices that never went to trial. A corporate predator, Jason summarized, who, apparently, now has Miami in his sights, Paul Sterling completed. Closing the folder, he turned to Louise. We need to accelerate the New START project. Not just the renovation, but also the selection of the first students and the development of the curriculum. Louise nodded, though worried. How will I do that while you're dealing with these threats? By dividing responsibilities, he replied. Jason and I will handle the legal and financial aspects, protecting the company. You focus on the project, which is our best long-term response. And as for the dossier, he pondered for a moment. We'll use the strategy that worked before, transparency. We'll have you reveal your story yourself on your terms before they can use it against us. The rest of the meeting was dedicated to outlining strategies. When everyone left, only Paul Sterling and Louise remained in the room. "How are you feeling about all this?" he asked. "Scared," she admitted honestly, "but also determined. I won't let Gregory destroy my life twice." Paul Sterling smiled approvingly. "That's the Louise I saw at that bus terminal. Fearless, even when she had every reason not to be." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them, a mutual understanding that transcended words. Louise realized with some surprise that in little more than a week that man had gone from complete stranger to someone she fully trusted. "There's something else I need to tell you about Rodriguez," Paul Sterling finally said. "Something I discovered this morning and preferred not to mention in front of the others." "What?" "He was involved in the same type of financial operation that ruined your business with Gregory. In fact," he paused significantly, "I have reasons to believe it was Rodriguez who financed the loan sharks Gregory sought out." Louise felt the air escape her lungs. "You're saying that? Rodriguez may have been the catalyst for the ruin of Flower and Art, and now, apparently, he's trying to do the same with Sterling Group, with a crucial difference. This time, he has Gregory on his side." The revelation fell like a weight on Louise. It wasn't just a matter of corporate competition or Gregory's personal revenge. There was a bigger, darker scheme. "Why didn't you tell the others?" "Because I don't have concrete proof yet. These are connections I'm making based on patterns of operation, dates, financial coincidences. I need more time to confirm." "What if you're right?" "Then we're not just protecting the New Start project or Sterling Group," Paul Sterling said gravely. "We're preventing other small businesses from being destroyed in the process." In the weeks that followed, Louise plunged headfirst into structuring the New Start project. She developed the course curriculum, established partnerships with raw material suppliers, visited social institutions to identify potential candidates. The intense work served as a shield against the anxiety of problems that still hung like dark clouds on the horizon. The renovation of the old mill progressed at an accelerated pace. The original metal structures gained a new shine, contrasting with modern equipment that arrived daily. The architectural project, respecting the memory of the place while adapting it for its new function, began to materialize. Paul Sterling, for his part, fought Rodriguez's offensive behind the scenes. With financial strategies that Louise only partially understood, he managed to hinder the aggressive acquisition of shares. The threatening dossier had been neutralized with an exclusive interview Louise gave to a respected business magazine, where she told her complete version of the Flower and Art. Bankruptcy, without omitting difficulties or her own mistakes, but highlighting Gregory's actions. On a particularly busy afternoon, while supervising the installation of the first industrial ovens, Louise received an unexpected visit. Ms. Zoe, the maternal cook from headquarters, appeared with a basket covered with a colorful cloth. "I thought you needed a homemade snack, dear," she smiled, revealing still steaming cheese breads. "How are things going?" Louise smiled, genuinely happy to see the older woman. Amidst so many pressures, Zoe represented a comforting presence, free of agendas or ulterior motives. "It's taking shape," she replied, indicating the surrounding space as she nibbled on a cheese bread. "Still a long way to go, but you can already imagine what it will be like." Zoe looked around with approval. "I always knew this place would produce food again someday. It has good energy." "Did you know the mill before?" "My father worked here for 30 years, the woman revealed. "I used to bring him lunch when I was a child. I remember the awadia, smell of flour in the air, the sound of the machines." Louise looked at the woman with new interest. You never mentioned that before. There are many things we don't mention until the right time, Zoe philosophized, like the fact that Paul Sterling hasn't been sleeping well for weeks, worried about this project and the maneuvers of this Rodriguez fellow. He told you about Rodriguez? He didn't need to. I've worked for Paul Sterling long enough to read between the lines and to recognize when he's fighting a battle that consumes him. Louise felt a pang of guilt. So focused on the project, she hadn't realized how much the situation affected Paul Sterling. He's coming today for a meeting with the architect, Zoe commented casually. Perhaps it's a good time for a conversation that goes beyond spreadsheets and blueprints. When Zoe left, Louise found herself thinking about the veiled advice. Indeed, her interactions with Paul Sterling in recent weeks had been almost exclusively professional. Discussions about the project, progress reports, strategies to deal with the media. The personal connection established in the first few days seemed to have been temporarily shelved in the name of efficiency and common goals. Paul Sterling arrived late in the afternoon. He looked tired, with subtle dark circles that his impeccable posture couldn't completely disguise. Even so, his eyes genuinely sparkled when he saw the progress of the work. Impressive, he commented, observing the already installed ovens and the marble counters beginning to take shape. It's turning out even better than the projections. The meeting with the architect was brief and objective. When they finished, it was already early evening. Most of the workers had left, leaving the space in an almost reverent silence. "Want to see something special?" Louise asked after the architect said goodbye. Intrigued, Paul Sterling followed her to a side room that had not yet been renovated. In the center, an old solid wood table supported a small portable oven. Ingredients methodically organized, and a covered dough resting on an improvised counter. "My secret laboratory," she explained with a shy smile. "I come here at the end of the day to test recipes for the teaching program." "You are truly committed to this project," he observed, genuinely touched by the gesture. "As are you," Louise replied, looking him directly in the eye. "Zoe told me you haven't been sleeping well." Paul Sterling sighed, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of vulnerability. "Zoe talks too much sometimes." "Or perhaps she says what's necessary," Louise retorted, handing him an apron. "Come, let's bake bread together. Best therapy there is." He hesitated for a moment as if the proposal was completely unexpected. "I haven't done that in decades." "Like riding a bicycle," she smiled. "You never forget." Reluctant at first, Paul Sterling soon surrendered to the experience. Louise guided his hands, showing him how to feel the texture of the dough, how to fold it to develop the gluten, how to respect the resting times. The slow and methodical process had something meditative about it that gradually dissipated the tension in both of them. "When I was a child, I helped my mother make bread," he revealed, as he kneaded the dough with now more confident movements. "We were very poor, but there was never a lack of flour at home. It was the only luxury she allowed herself." "My grandmother used to say that a house without the smell of bread is a house without a soul," Louise commented, subtly adjusting his technique. "Your grandmother was wise," Paul Sterling smiled. After a few minutes of silent work, he added, "Rodriguez made an offer to buy 30% of Sterling Group yesterday." Louise stopped her movements, surprised. "And you?" "I refused, of course, but he's increasing the pressure. Some smaller investors have already sold their shares to him. Soon he'll have enough influence to call an extraordinary board meeting." "What does that mean for the project?" Paul Sterling sighed. "If he convinces other shareholders, he might try to suspend investments he considers unprofitable in the short term, like the New Start project. But you're the majority owner, aren't you?" "Yes, but there are decisions that require board approval, and Rodriguez is very persuasive, especially when arguing based on immediate profits." Louise absorbed the information in silence, continuing to work the dough. "What can we do?" "Prove that the project is not just a social initiative, but also a viable investment. If we show that the bakery school can be self-sustaining and still generate a return, we'll have concrete arguments against Rodriguez. How much time do we have? 2 weeks until the next board meeting. Louise took a deep breath, her mind already working on possibilities. Then we need to accelerate. Not just the renovation, but the business plan too. They worked the dough to the ideal point, dividing it into portions and shaping them into traditional forms. As they placed the breads in the small oven to bake, a quiet comfort settled between them, the complicity of those facing a challenge together. "Do you know what my mother always said about bread?" Paul Sterling commented, watching the loaves through the oven glass. "That it's like life. It needs time, patience, and sometimes firm hands to take shape." "And heat to transform," Louise completed. Their gazes met, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. In that moment, something subtle changed between them, a connection that transcended one's gratitude or the other's professional admiration. It was something deeper, more personal. The moment was interrupted by Paul Sterling's phone. His expression immediately hardened when he saw the number. "Hello?" "Yes, Rachel. I'm at the mill with Louise." "What?" Louise observed the transformation in his expression, from momentary tranquility to acute concern. "When did it happen? Was anyone hurt?" "Right. We're going there now." He hung up the phone with slightly trembling hands. There was a fire at the main Sterling's bakery in the Harbor Lights district, apparently controlled before causing serious damage, but what? Firefighters suspect arson. The aroma of baking bread, which moments before brought comfort, now seemed an ironic counterpoint to the alarming news. Louise quickly turned off the oven. "Let's go," she said, determined. "The breads can wait." On the way to the Harbor Lights district, the silence in the car was heavy. When they arrived, they found the street blocked by fire trucks and police cars. The historic facade of Sterling Bakery was smudged with soot, but structurally intact. A small crowd of curious onlookers watched the activity. Paul Sterling was immediately recognized and led to the officer in charge. Louise followed him, noticing how he maintained his composure despite his evident concern. "It was in the storage area," the firefighter explained. "Fortunately, the sprinkler system worked quickly, and an employee doing inventory noticed the smell before it spread. The damage is mainly from smoke and water, not structural." "And why do you suspect arson?" Paul Sterling asked. "We found evidence of a simple incendiary device. Amateur, but clearly intentional. The police are investigating." As Paul Sterling spoke with the authorities, Louise scanned the crowd. That's when she noticed, at a distance, 2 figures observing the scene. Even in the dim light of night, she recognized Marcus, the former manager. Beside him, an older man, elegantly dressed, whom she had never seen in person, but recognized from the photo in the dossier, Arthur Rodriguez. The Argentine's gaze crossed with hers for an instant. A cold smile formed on his lips, followed by an almost imperceptible nod. Not a greeting, but a warning. Seconds later, both disappeared into the crowd. Louise felt a chill that had nothing to do with Miami's night breeze. The battle had escalated from corporate maneuvers to something much more dangerous. The Sterling Group board meeting room had never seemed so hostile. Around the large mahogany table, tense faces reflected the gravity of the moment. At the head, Paul Sterling maintained his composure, though his hands, discreetly resting under the table, betrayed tension in his prominent veins. "Gentlemen, I appreciate everyone's presence at this extraordinary meeting," he began, addressing the 8 board members. "Recent events demand clear and immediate decisions." Across the table, Arthur Rodriguez smiled with studied confidence. In the 2 weeks since the fire at the Harbor Lights District Bakery, the Argentine had intensified his strategy, acquiring more shares and enticing board members with promises of record profitability. "I fully agree," Rodriguez interjected, his accent carrying a falsely cordial tone. "That is precisely why I requested this meeting. Sterling Group faces unprecedented challenges: an arson fire, negative publicity, and projects with questionable returns consuming valuable resources." Some board members nodded. They were businessmen first and foremost, and the words "questionable returns" always raised alarms. "The fire caused minimal damage thanks to our security system," Paul Sterling countered calmly. "As for the publicity, our public approval ratings have never been higher since we announced the New Start project." "Ah, yes, the famous project," Rodriguez emphasized the word with subtle disdain. "A bakery school for people experiencing homelessness. Noble, no doubt, but economically unviable." "People in vulnerable situations," Paul Sterling corrected, "and I disagree with the economic assessment. The project has the potential to be self-sustaining in 18 months, as detailed in the report you all received." Rodriguez dismissed the argument with a wave of his hand. Optimistic projections rarely materialize. Meanwhile, the renovation of the old mill has already consumed millions that could be invested in expanding the chain to other major cities. The discussion continued for almost 2 hours. Paul Sterling defended the project with numbers, feasibility studies, and the company's social commitment since its founding. Rodriguez countered with projections of immediate profits if resources were redirected. Gradually, Paul Sterling's expression revealed growing concern. 2 board members who normally supported him now seemed hesitant, seduced by the Argentine's rhetoric. With 15% of the shares already in his possession, Rodriguez would only need to convince 3 more board members to form a sufficient majority to suspend the project. When the vote seemed imminent, the door to the room opened. Unexpectedly, Louise entered, followed by Rachel, who seemed to have tried to stop her. "I apologize for the interruption," Louise said firmly, "but there is crucial information the board should consider before any decision." Rodriguez rose, indignant. "This is an outrage. This woman is not authorized to—" "Ms. Bennett is the technical director of the New Start project," Paul Sterling interrupted, "and she has every right to present relevant information." Rachel quickly distributed folders to the board members, while Louise connected her laptop to the room's projector. Paul Sterling watched, surprised. He had not been informed of this intervention. "Gentlemen, my name is Louise Bennett," she began, projecting the first image, the old Biscayne mill already partially renovated. "Exactly 10 days ago, we started a pilot program at the New Start project." Surprised murmurs filled the room. Not even Paul Sterling knew of this development. "With minimal resources and provisional equipment, we trained a group of 15 people in basic bread production. In the last 5 days, we began small-scale sales to local establishments." The next image showed people of various ages, in improvised uniforms working at already installed ovens, their faces concentrated and proud. "These are our first students, previously considered social costs. They are now producers. People who slept on the streets now arrive promptly at 5 a.m. to start production." Rodriguez let out a disdainful laugh. "Moving, no doubt, but sentimentality doesn't pay bills." "I fully agree," Louise replied, surprising him. The next image displayed a graph. "That's why I brought numbers. In just 5 days of partial operation, the project's revenue has already covered 30% of operational costs. The initial projection estimated 15% at this stage." The board members leaned forward, suddenly interested. Concrete data spoke more than philosophical arguments. "More importantly," she continued, now projecting an online news report, "the initiative is already generating organic publicity, which would normally cost millions in marketing. 3 establishments that experimentally purchased our products have already requested regular supply, and we have received 2 partnership proposals from companies interested in associating their brands with the project." Paul Sterling couldn't suppress a discreet smile. Louise had conducted the pilot program secretly, probably to avoid external interference, or to present accomplished facts instead of promises. Impressive, I must admit, commented one of the oldest board members, but there's still the issue of security. An arson fire cannot be ignored. About that, Louise paused strategically, looking directly at Rodriguez. I'd like to introduce a guest. The door opened again. To general shock, Gregory Pierce entered, visibly nervous, avoiding Rodriguez's furious gaze. This is Gregory Pierce, my former partner, Louise introduced. He has information about the fire that the board needs to hear. Gregory approached the table, clearly uncomfortable with all eyes on him. 2 weeks ago, I attended a meeting with Marcus Thorne and Mr. Rodriguez, he began, his voice hesitant. In that meeting, the need to pressure Paul Sterling to sell his stake in the company was discussed. Marcus suggested that a scare might work. Rodriguez stood up abruptly. This is slander. I have nothing to do with that fire, and I will not allow... I have the recording, Gregory interrupted, placing a small device on the table. I recorded the conversation as personal insurance. I never imagined Marcus would actually set the place on fire. I just thought it prudent to protect myself, considering Mr. Rodriguez's methods in previous businesses. A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Paul Sterling watched the scene, as surprised as the others. This unexpected turn was not part of any plan he knew of. Why are you doing this? One of the board members asked Gregory directly. You were allied with Rodriguez as far as we know. Gregory briefly looked at Louise before answering. Because I realized I was repeating past mistakes. When I was co-opted by loan sharks years ago and destroyed the business I had with Louise, it was the exact same strategy. Increasing pressure, promises of quick gains, until there was no way out. He paused, visibly emotional. And when I learned that Rodriguez planned to destroy the New Start project, something that is genuinely helping people, I couldn't continue to be complicit. This is pure theater, Rodriguez exclaimed, now visibly agitated. A cheap staging orchestrated by Sterling and this woman to manipulate the board. The oldest board member, who until then had watched everything in silence, raised his hand, requesting to speak. Mr. Rodriguez, I have known Paul Sterling for over 20 years. He can be many things, obstinate, sometimes overly idealistic, but I have never seen him lie or manipulate this board. He turned to Gregory. Would you be willing to testify officially about these accusations? Yes, sir, Gregory replied. I already delivered copies of the recording to the authorities this morning. Rodriguez visibly paled. In that case, the senior board member continued, I propose that we postpone any decision on the New Start project until these allegations are properly investigated. And I strongly suggest that Mr. Rodriguez refrain from participating in corporate decisions until the matter is clarified. The proposal was quickly seconded and approved by a wide majority. Rodriguez, realizing his defeat, gathered his documents with abrupt gestures. This isn't over, Sterling, he hissed, as he passed Paul Sterling on his way to the door. You don't know who you're dealing with. When the room finally emptied, leaving only Paul Sterling, Louise, and Gregory, a silence laden with unspoken questions hung between them. How did you convince him? Paul Sterling finally asked, indicating Gregory with a gesture. Actually, Gregory replied before Louise could speak, it was the other way around. I sought out Louise after the fire. I realized Rodriguez was going too far. Louise nodded, confirming. He showed up at the mill 5 days ago saying he needed to tell me the truth. I confess I didn't believe him initially, but the recording was real, Gregory completed, and it contained more than just the fire plan. Rodriguez revealed that he has used the same strategy in several cities, identifying promising businesses, creating financial problems, offering predatory help, and finally taking control. That's what happened with our bakery, Louise explained to Paul Sterling. The loan sharks Gregory resorted to were in fact Rodriguez's intermediaries. He purposely created the debt situation. Paul Sterling absorbed the information with a grave expression. And the pilot program at the mill? Why didn't you tell me about that? Louise smiled shyly. because we needed concrete results, not promises, and because you were so busy protecting the company from Rodriguez's attacks that I feared burdening you with more operational details. It was my idea, actually, Gregory interjected. As minimal compensation for the damage I caused Louise in the past, I helped structure the pilot with limited resources. My contacts with suppliers facilitated emergency purchases. Paul Sterling looked long at the man he had until recently considered an enemy. Why the sudden change of sides, Gregory? The truth. Gregory hesitated, looking away. I heard Rodriguez talk about his plans for after he took control. It wouldn't just be the end of the New Start project, but the gradual dismantling of the entire Sterling Group. Mass layoffs, sale of valuable assets, pure speculative profit. He paused, visibly uncomfortable, and he mentioned that accidents happen when he spoke specifically about both of you. Louise paled. The implicit threat was too clear to ignore. Were the police informed about this too? Paul Sterling asked. Yes, although that part isn't in the recording, just what I heard directly. Paul Sterling stood up, walking to the window that offered a view of Biscayne Bay. The afternoon sun reflected on the waters, creating golden patterns that contrasted with the seriousness of the moment. Well, it seems we won an important battle today, he finally said, but the war is far from over. Rodriguez won't give up easily. What do we do now? Louise asked. We continue, he replied simply. We expand the pilot program, accelerate the renovation, prove to the board that the project is viable. He turned to Gregory. And what about you? Gregory suddenly seemed smaller, as if the weight of his actions finally hit him completely. I don't expect forgiveness, if that's what you're asking. I just wanted to correct something, at least once in my life. Paul Sterling studied him for a few moments, assessing his sincerity. There is room for everyone who genuinely wants to start over, he finally said. This is, after all, the spirit of the project. When Gregory left, Louise approached Paul Sterling, still contemplative by the window. Do you trust him? She asked softly. Not completely, he replied honestly. But I believe in second chances, and more importantly, I believe in you, who decided to trust him enough for this plan. Their gazes met, with an intimacy that had been silently growing between them, despite all the external turbulences, or perhaps paradoxically strengthened by them. The breads we baked together that night, Paul Sterling commented, seemingly changing the subject. Did they bake despite the fire? Louise smiled, surprised by the memory amidst so many serious events. Yes, I went back the next morning and found them perfectly baked, though cold. Why? Just thinking that sometimes what we start continues to transform even when we're not looking. His gaze became more intense, like certain feelings. Those words hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Louise felt her heart race, surprised not only by the insinuation but by her own reaction to it, a mixture of apprehension and something very close to hope. The moment was interrupted by Paul Sterling's phone. He answered with a professional expression, though his eyes remained on Louise. Rachel? Yes, we're going there now. He hung up, explaining, It seems we have unexpected visitors at the mill. The press found out about the pilot program. The old Biscayne mill buzzed with activity. Journalists, photographers, and TV crews circulated through the space, interviewing the pilot program students who proudly displayed the results of their work. Artisan sourdough breads, rustic and fragrant. How did this happen? Louise asked Miss Zoe, who supervised the improvised tasting area, where visitors sampled the products. The woman smiled enigmatically. It seems a certain TV network received an anonymous tip about a silent revolution happening at the old mill. Paul Sterling, talking to reporters a few feet away, caught Louise's questioning gaze and responded with a discreet shrug that clearly said, It wasn't me. The media coverage was exactly what the project needed. Positive visibility that would make it virtually impossible for Rodriguez or anyone else to try to shut it down without facing enormous negative repercussions. Among the various journalists, one stood out for his more incisive and well-informed questions. He approached Louise when she finally managed a moment alone. "Luke Miller, from the City Herald," he introduced himself. "I'm doing a special report on initiatives that transform lives. Can I ask you some specific questions?" Louise nodded and soon realized that this was no ordinary reporter. His questions showed deep knowledge of artisan baking, solidarity economy, and even her personal history, details that had not been publicly disclosed. "How did you know about my past in France?" she asked, intrigued. The man smiled. "Let's just say I have good sources. In fact," he lowered his voice, "I've been investigating Arthur Rodriguez for almost 2 years. Your bakery wasn't the only one he destroyed with predatory tactics." Louise felt a shiver. "You know about flour and art?" "And about at least 7 other similar businesses in 3 different countries," Luke confirmed. "Rodriguez has a pattern. He identifies promising ventures, especially those led by inexperienced but talented young people, and ruins them to then acquire what's left for pennies on the dollar." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you managed what no one else has, to expose part of his scheme. The police investigation into the fire may finally set a precedent for broader investigations." Louise watched Paul Sterling across the room, animatedly talking with a group of students. His face radiated the kind of satisfaction that only comes when a dream begins to materialize. "What do you think Rodriguez will do now?" she asked the journalist. "Hard to predict. He rarely accepts defeat, but he's also never faced public exposure like this." Luke handed her a card. "If you learn of any moves he makes or remember more details about his past actions, please contact me. This story is far from over." The afternoon wore on as the last journalists finally left. The program's students, exhausted but visibly fulfilled, organized the space for the next day. Louise watched everything with a mixture of pride and apprehension. The day's success was undeniable, but the journalist's words about Rodriguez left her uneasy. Paul Sterling approached, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "Intense day," he commented, handing her one of the cups. "More than I could imagine," she agreed, "but productive." "Extremely. Mr. Davison called me a short while ago. He said that, after seeing the TV coverage, he's convinced that the project is not only viable, but strategically brilliant for the network's image." Louise smiled, finally allowing herself to relax a little. "So we succeeded?" "An important battle, yes, but something tells me Rodriguez still has one last move planned." Paul Sterling looked around at the space that was gradually taking shape according to the original vision. "This place means a lot to me, you know? Not just because of the project itself." "Why?" "Because it represents a complete cycle. From the hunger I experienced in my youth to being able to create a place that fights the hunger of others. From the bread you gave me at that bus terminal to being able to repay it manifold." He paused, looking at her directly. "And because it was here that I realized something important about myself." "What?" Louise asked, almost in a whisper. Paul Sterling moved a little closer. "That my admiration for you goes far beyond gratitude or professional respect." Louise's heart raced. Those words, spoken with such simplicity and honesty, touched a place within her that had long been dormant, the ability to trust, to allow herself to feel again. Before she could answer, however, they were interrupted by Rachel, who arrived in a hurry. "Mr. Sterling, I just received a call from headquarters security. Someone broke into your office." Paul Sterling's expression immediately transformed. "Was there damage? Was anything taken?" "Apparently just your personal computer and some documents from the safe. The police are already on their way." Louise and Paul Sterling exchanged alarmed glances. It was no coincidence that this happened precisely on the day everyone was focused on the mill, far from headquarters. "Rodriguez," Paul Sterling murmured. "He must be looking for something to use against us." now that he lost. On the board, or to protect himself from the accusations, Louise added. What important documents were in that safe? Paul Sterling suddenly paled. The records of the investigation into him, everything I managed to gather about his previous schemes, including what happened with your bakery. We need to go there, Louise said, already heading for the exit. No, Paul Sterling held her arm. It might be exactly what he wants, to lure us into some kind of trap. Let the police do their job. At that moment, Louise's phone rang. Unknown number. With a strange premonition, she answered, putting it on speakerphone. Ms. Bennett, the voice with an Argentine accent was unmistakable. I imagine you already know about the small incident at Sterling Group headquarters. What do you want, Rodriguez? Paul Sterling asked, approaching the phone. Ah, Mr. Sterling is listening too. Excellent. Saves me a call. The tone was falsely cordial. Let's get straight to the point. I have documents that could be very damaging to both of you if they reached certain hands. But I am willing to return them and end my participation in your business for a price. What price? Paul Sterling questioned, tense. The Biscayne Mill, Rodriguez replied. Transfer ownership to me, and all documents will be returned intact. Otherwise, well, it would be a shame if the authorities discovered certain irregularities in the network's accounting, wouldn't it? There are no irregularities, Paul Sterling firmly countered. Are you sure? Documents can be so easily altered these days. The threat of forgery was explicit. Rodriguez was willing to fabricate evidence if necessary. You have 24 hours to decide, the Argentine continued. Tomorrow, same time, I want an answer. And remember, it's just an old mill in exchange for your reputations and potentially your freedoms. The call ended, leaving a heavy silence. Paul Sterling, Louise, and Rachel exchanged worried glances. He's bluffing, Rachel finally stated. There wouldn't be time to convincingly forge documents. Don't underestimate Rodriguez, Paul Sterling warned. He probably already had everything prepared as a contingency plan. Louise watched him closely, noticing something in his expression. There's something else, isn't there? Something we're not considering. Paul Sterling hesitated, as if debating internally how much to reveal. The documents in the safe weren't just about the investigation. He paused, taking a deep breath. There were also personal documents, including my will. Will? Louise repeated, confused. Why would that be important to Rodriguez? Because, Paul Sterling looked directly at her, I recently modified it to include a specific clause. In the event of my absence, ownership of the Biscayne Mill and the directorship of the New Start project would be transferred entirely to you, Louise. The revelation dropped like a bomb. Louise felt momentarily breathless, unable to fully process its meaning. Why would you do that? She finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. We've barely known each other for a month. Because I saw in you the right person to carry this legacy, because I trust your values and your ability more than anyone else's. He paused significantly, adding more softly, and because, despite the short time, you've become important to me in ways I didn't expect. Rachel, sensing the intensity of the moment, discreetly moved away, leaving them alone. If Rodriguez discovers this, Paul Sterling continued, he'll have another reason to consider you a threat, which deeply concerns me. I'm more concerned about what he could do with forged documents to harm you, Louise countered. Years of building a reputation can be destroyed in days with serious accusations, even if false. Paul Sterling nodded, acknowledging the truth in those words. We need a plan, and fast. As the sun set on the Miami horizon, casting orange shadows through the interior of the old mill, two determined minds began to formulate a strategy to confront what appeared to be the final move of a dangerous adversary. The aroma of fresh bread still hung in the air, a silent reminder of what was truly at stake. Not just a business or a reputation, but a dream of new beginnings for many who never had a first chance. And perhaps, though neither would openly admit it, also at stake was the possibility of a personal new beginning for both of them, a new chapter that was only just beginning to be written, despite all the forces conspiring to prevent its pages from turning. The clock struck 11:45 p.m. when Louise finally completed the preparations. The great hall of the old Biscayne mill, only partially lit, created a play of shadows and lights that accentuated the atmosphere of tension. On the newly installed marble counters, dozens of breads of different shapes and sizes awaited, still warm, artfully arranged. The aroma that filled the environment was the result of an entire night of intense work. Through the wide windows, she observed the deserted street, occasionally swept by the headlights of a solitary car. In 15 minutes, Rodriguez would arrive to receive his answer regarding the blackmail. She thought about how symbolic it was that this final confrontation would happen there, in the place that represented everything they had fought to build. "Are the special breads ready?" Paul Sterling asked, approaching silently. Despite the gravity of the situation, his face displayed a surprising calm. "Yes," Louise replied, indicating a small basket separated from the others. "Exactly as we planned." Paul Sterling observed the production with evident admiration. "You truly outdid yourself tonight." "Consider it my statement of intent," she smiled nervously. "If all goes well, these will be the first official products of the bakery school." "And if it goes wrong?" The question hung in the air, laden with dark possibilities. "Then it will be a beautiful last act," Louise replied, trying to maintain lightness in her voice, though both knew the risks involved. The strategy was audacious, perhaps reckless. Instead of negotiating on Rodriguez's terms, they had decided to confront him directly, on his own turf, with his own rules, but with a twist the Argentine would never expect. Paul Sterling's phone vibrated. "He's here," he announced after checking the message. "Jason is accompanying him." Louise felt her heart race. She instinctively touched the small device in her apron pocket, a recorder provided by the journalist Luke Miller, who was waiting with the police in an unmarked vehicle nearby. The large metal door slid open with a characteristic creak. Arthur Rodriguez entered, impeccable in his Italian suit, followed by Jason, Paul Sterling's legal advisor, whose tense expression betrayed the discomfort of the situation. "What a picturesque setting," Rodriguez commented with his heavy accent, observing the breads on the counters. "A last batch before transferring ownership?" "Something like that," Paul Sterling replied. "But first, would you like some coffee? The night is cold." Rodriguez smiled, amused by the hospitality amidst an extortion. "Why not? I have always appreciated rituals of civility, even in unusual circumstances." While Louise prepared coffee at a small side table, Paul Sterling led the Argentine to the central area of the hall, where a round table had been strategically positioned. On it, a closed document folder. "I presume these are the property transfer papers?" Rodriguez inquired, indicating the folder with a nod of his chin. "All the necessary documentation," Paul Sterling confirmed. "But before we conclude, I'd like to understand exactly what you plan to do with this place." Rodriguez accepted the cup of coffee offered by Louise, taking a small sip before responding. "I'm a practical man, Sterling. This building has a prime location, historical value. It will be much more profitable as a luxury commercial center than as charity disguised as business." "And the program students, the people who started rebuilding their lives here?" Louise asked, unable to contain her indignation. The Argentine shrugged with studied indifference. "Inevitable collateral of progress, my dear. The market is not moved by individual stories." "Interesting theory," Paul Sterling commented, "especially coming from someone who built a career systematically destroying individual stories." Rodriguez's expression subtly hardened. "Be careful, Sterling. The documents I possess can—" "Forged documents," Paul Sterling interrupted. "Yes, we already deduced that. The question is, would you be willing to use forgeries in a court of law under penalty of imprisonment?" A dangerous gleam crossed Rodriguez's eyes. "It's a risky game you're playing. You underestimate my influence and resources." "On the contrary," Paul Sterling countered, "we estimate them precisely, including your involvement in the bankruptcy of Louise's bakery years ago." For the first time, Rodriguez seemed genuinely surprised. He quickly recovered, however, composing his controlled demeanor. "Baseless conspiracy theories," he dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other commitments tonight. The documents, please." Paul Sterling slid the folder towards him. "Before you open it, I'd like you to try something special Louise prepared to celebrate. Our agreement." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "Am I your culinary guinea pig now?" "Consider it a professional courtesy," Louise interjected, approaching, with the small basket of differentiated breads. "After all, you'll soon own a space with a century-old history of food production." Intrigued and perhaps a little flattered, Rodriguez chose a small bread of peculiar shape. He examined it briefly before taking an experimental bite. "Sourdough, a touch of Provençal herbs. Interesting," he commented, genuinely impressed with the flavor. "It's a special recipe," Louise explained. "I developed it for occasions that deserve to be memorable." While Rodriguez savored the bread, Paul Sterling opened the folder he had handed over. Instead of transfer documents, it contained newspaper clippings, financial reports, and transcripts of testimonies, all related to companies ruined by the Argentine over the years, including Flour and Art. "What does this mean?" Rodriguez questioned, growing irritation in his voice. "Documentation of your activities over the last 10 years, Paul Sterling explained calmly. Patterns of predatory acquisition, financial manipulation, planned sabotage, all meticulously organized and already in the possession of the competent authorities." Rodriguez visibly paled, looking at the bread in his hand with sudden suspicion. "Don't worry, there's nothing illicit in the bread," Louise smiled, sensing his fear. "Although it's tempting, poisoning was never my style." "What do you intend with this?" Rodriguez asked, setting the bread aside and standing abruptly. "Is this some kind of trap?" "Just a demonstration that we're not the only ones who can gather compromising documents," Paul Sterling replied. "But unlike yours, ours are authentic." Rodriguez let out a nervous laugh. "I admire the audacity, but this changes little. I still have enough to destroy your reputations, even if it's eventually proven false." "Are you sure?" Louise asked, pulling the small recorder from her pocket and placing it on the table. "Because every word of this conversation is being recorded, including your implicit admission of forgery and blackmail." Rodriguez's face contorted into a mask of contained fury. "You have no idea of the dangerous game you're playing." "On the contrary," Paul Sterling countered, "we know the rules better than you imagine. For example, we know you didn't come alone tonight." As if on cue, the side door opened. Gregory Pierce entered, followed by Marcus Thorne. Both looked tense, uncomfortable. "My collaborators are very punctual," Rodriguez commented sarcastically, regaining some composure. "They came to witness the conclusion of our agreement." "Actually," Gregory interjected, avoiding looking directly at Rodriguez, "we came for another purpose." Marcus advanced, placing on the table a folder identical to the one that had been stolen from Paul Sterling's office. "The original documents," he announced, visibly nervous. "All of them." Rodriguez stood motionless, incredulous. "What do you think you're doing?" "Choosing the right side for the first time," Gregory replied. He turned to Louise. "The forged copies are here, too. Rodriguez planned to use them today if you didn't accept his demands." The Argentine, realizing the betrayal, moved quickly towards the exit, only to find his path blocked by two plainclothes police officers. Behind them, the journalist Luke Miller observed the scene with the undeniable professional satisfaction. "Arthur Rodriguez," the older police officer announced, "you are being detained for questioning on suspicion of extortion, document forgery, and association with the arson fire at Sterling Bakery." The Argentine's face contorted in a mixture of rage and disbelief as he was handcuffed. "You don't have enough evidence. My lawyers will sort this out in hours." "Perhaps," the officer replied calmly, "but the operation in your hotel room is happening simultaneously with this one, and something tells me we'll find interesting material there." As Rodriguez was led out, protesting vehemently, Luke approached Paul Sterling and Louise, collecting the recorder. "Request granted," the journalist smiled. "More than enough material for my special report, and of course, for the lawsuit." "I didn't expect Marcus to switch sides too," Louise commented, watching the former manager who was now talking in a low voice with Gregory in a corner. Apparently, when he discovered that Rodriguez planned to demolish the mill instead of turning it into a competing bakery, as he had promised, he felt betrayed, Luke explained. "Marcus may have many flaws, but he has a genuine love for baking." The scene that followed had an air of resolution and new beginnings. As the police left with Rodriguez and the journalist departed with his precious material, Paul Sterling, Louise, Gregory, and Marcus remained in the large hall of the mill, surrounded by the aroma of fresh bread, an almost palpable symbol of what they had achieved and what was yet to come. "What happens now?" Marcus asked after a long silence. "Now," Paul Sterling replied, "we continue building. The New Start project proceeds as planned." He paused, studying the two men in front of him. "The question is, what role do you wish to play going forward?" Gregory and Marcus exchanged uncertain glances. It was Gregory who spoke first. "I don't expect to work with you again after everything I've done, but if there's any way I can contribute, even from a distance—" "Perhaps there is," Louise interrupted, surprising everyone, including herself, with her willingness to forgive. "The project will need financial consulting and supplier contacts, areas in which you have proven experience." "And me?" Marcus asked hesitantly. Paul Sterling observed him for a long time before answering. "You know bakery operations like few others. You could contribute to the training of the students." He paused significantly. "But you would have to answer to Louise, who will be the executive director of the project." A silence heavy with meaning followed. Marcus, the man who had publicly humiliated Louise that first morning at the bakery, now faced the prospect of working under her leadership. "It would be a learning opportunity," he finally replied, with a humility no one would expect from him. When the two men left, taking with them the promise of a formal meeting the following week to discuss details, Paul Sterling and Louise finally found themselves alone. The large wall clock marked almost 3 in the morning. "Was an intense night," he commented, sinking heavily into a chair. "That's an understatement," Louise smiled, joining him. "But it worked. Every piece of the plan fit perfectly." "Thanks to your idea of bringing Gregory and Marcus to our side," Paul Sterling acknowledged, "I confess I had my doubts, especially about Marcus." "Everyone deserves a second chance," she replied simply. "Isn't that the spirit of the New Start project?" Their gazes met, sharing more than words could express. The journey of the past few weeks had transformed both of them in ways they were only beginning to understand. Paul Sterling stood up, approaching the large window that now showed the first hints of dawn, painting the Miami horizon. "When I was a child and went hungry," he spoke, almost in a whisper, "my mother used to say that the smell of fresh bread was the aroma of hope. That as long as we could smell that scent, there was still reason to believe in better days." Louise joined him by the window, their shoulders almost touching. "My grandmother used to say something similar. That bread carries within it the complete cycle of life, from the planted seed to the nourishing food, from hard work to final satisfaction." "That's why this project is so important," Paul Sterling continued. "It's not just about teaching people to bake bread or creating jobs. It's about restoring broken cycles, offering fertile ground for new seeds." He turned to face her directly, gathering courage for the words he had long wanted to say. "Louise, in these few months, you've transformed not only this project, but also He hesitated briefly. Also, my perspective on many things. She felt her heart race, aware that they were crossing an important boundary. What things? About second chances. About new beginnings. He took a deep breath. About the possibility of building something new, not just professionally, but personally. Louise smiled, allowing herself to express feelings she had carefully kept guarded. It's funny how life comes full circle. When I walked into that bakery, ready to pick up crumbs from the floor, I never imagined being here now, not only with a new professional purpose, but also, he prompted when she hesitated, also with the possibility of a new personal beginning, with someone who saw me at my worst moment and still saw value in me. Paul Sterling gently touched her face, a gesture as gentle as it was resolute. I saw value in you since that bus terminal so many years ago. The girl who shared her bread without asking for anything in return already carried the essence of the extraordinary woman who stands before me today. On the horizon, the sun began to rise, casting golden rays through the wide windows of the mill, illuminating the space with promises of a new day. Paul Sterling leaned in slowly, giving Louise time to pull back if she wished. She did not pull back. Their lips met in a soft yet deeply meaningful kiss, not an end, but the beginning of a new story. 6 months later, the old Biscayne mill, completely renovated, overflowed with life and activity. In the large main hall, now equipped with gleaming industrial ovens and impeccable counters, 30 students of diverse backgrounds and life stories worked intently, following the instructions of their tutors. In the display cases of the attached cafe school, artisan breads, cakes, and other products displayed labels with the official New Start Project logo, a wheat stalk intertwined with an open hand, simultaneously symbolizing food and opportunity. Louise walked among the workstations, observing each student's progress, offering tips and words of encouragement. Her white apron, with her name embroidered in blue, now bore the title of Executive Director. In recent weeks, 3 major supermarket chains had signed contracts to market the bakery school's products, consolidating the project's financial viability. In the glass-walled office on the mezzanine, Paul Sterling showed the facilities to a group of entrepreneurs interested in replicating the model in other cities. Through the glass, his gaze met Louise's, and they exchanged knowing smiles. In the service area, Ms. Zoe lovingly supervised the students, learning to interact with customers. Marcus, surprisingly adapted to the role of technical instructor, demonstrated the perfect dough-cutting technique to an attentive group. In a more secluded corner, Gregory talked with suppliers, negotiating prices for the next crop's raw materials. When the group of visitors descended to see the production area more closely, Paul Sterling took the opportunity to approach Louise. 3 international delegations confirmed visits for next month, he commented, unable to hide his pride. The model is even attracting attention from the UN. I never imagined we would grow so quickly, she replied, observing the vibrant space around them. We already have a waiting list for the next class. A young student timidly approached, presenting a freshly baked bread for evaluation. Louise examined it with professional attention, the golden crust shattering to the touch, the perfectly airy crumb, the complex aroma of well-conducted natural fermentation. "Perfect, Carlos," she approved with a genuine smile. "This is on par with the best I've tasted in France." The young man walked away beaming, returning to his workbench with light steps. "You changed his life," Paul Sterling commented, "as you've changed everyone's here." "We changed them," Louise corrected. "This project is as much yours as it is mine." Speaking of ours, Paul Sterling hesitated briefly. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about us." Before he could continue, they were interrupted by Luke Miller, the journalist, who arrived accompanied by a film crew. "Sorry to intrude," Luke smiled. "We're ready for the special interview about the project's 6-month anniversary." "Of course," Louise replied, "in the cafe area, as arranged." As they headed for the interview, Paul Sterling discreetly held Louise's hand, sliding something onto her finger. Surprised, she looked down and saw a delicate gold ring with small carved wheat grains. "Can we talk about this later?" he whispered. "About building something even more permanent than this project together?" With her heart overflowing, Louise nodded, unable to form words. The cameras were already positioning themselves. The interviewer was preparing his notes, but at that moment, for her, the world had shrunk to that small ring and the promise it represented. The interview proceeded naturally. They spoke about the challenges overcome, the results achieved, the plans for expansion. Luke, always perceptive, noticed the ring, but discreetly avoided mentioning it, respecting the personal moment amidst the professional agenda. When the last questions were answered and the crew began to dismantle their equipment, Louise and Paul Sterling found a moment of privacy on the small balcony that offered a view of Biscayne Bay. "So," she finally managed to speak, looking at the ring on her finger, "this is a proposal," he confirmed, taking her hands in his, "for our new beginning together to be official and permanent." Tears of happiness welled up in Louise's eyes. It seems the cycle truly completes itself. From hunger to abundance, from loneliness to partnership, from crumbs on the floor to— she made a sweeping gesture indicating everything around them. "To an empire built with bread and purpose," he completed, smiling. They embraced under the setting sun of Miami, while below them, in the main hall, a new batch was being pulled from the ovens, filling the air with that unmistakable aroma, the smell of hope, of opportunities, of new beginnings. The aroma that, years earlier, in a distant bus terminal, had connected their lives in a seemingly casual encounter, but which fate had transformed into the seed of something much greater, something that now, like good bread, had grown, fermented, and transformed into sustenance not only for them, but for all who crossed the path of that old mill, now reborn as a beacon of new possibilities. Because, as the motto engraved at the entrance of the New Start project said, "Life is like bread. What others call crumbs can be the beginning of something new." If this narrative about second chances and redemption resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of life on the southern coast, with authentic characters who face challenges and discover the true meaning of starting over. Share in the comments what moment moved you the most on Louise's journey, from crumbs on the floor to leading a transformative project. We look forward to reading your impressions and knowing how this story touched your life. Until the next narrative.